So I'd sit in meetings or I'd talk about ministry or I'd be doing my job and I felt like, man, I am such a fake. And if anybody knew the real me, they would reject me. And so that was like, okay, I've got to do something here because no amount of achieving success is getting me what I want in life. It's actually causing me to feel more and more disconnected from who I am.
Welcome to the Crucible Project Podcast. The Crucible Project is a nonprofit organization committed to creating a world of men and women who live with integrity, grace, and courage, helping them to fulfill their God-given purpose. This podcast will discuss important and sometimes difficult topics while delivering practical life applications with men and women who are currently practicing this work. We are igniting Christ-like change in men and women through experiences of radical honesty and grace.
Hey, welcome to the Crucible Project Podcast. I'm your host for today, Joy Dunning, and I'm here today with Chris Modrzejewski. Hey, Chris, how are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for coming. Before we get into what we're going to talk about, tell us who you are and what life is like for you right now.
I live in the Chicago area. I am married to Lisa, who actually works full-time for the Crucible Project. She oversees the women's ministry. So it's a joy we get to do this thing together. I have 4 kids. My oldest is 16 and my youngest is 6. So 2 girls, 2 boys. I'm a pastor in a church in Arlington Heights. I've been at my church for a long time. 15, 16 years. Actually longer than that. I think we're closer to 18 years now. So been here a long time and love the church, and raising my family in this community has been a gift. So that's a little bit about me, I guess.
You started as the youth pastor, right?
I did. So I was hired initially part-time to do youth ministry. So I was working at Starbucks to get health insurance for my new family, just me and Lisa at the time. And then about 6 months into it, they asked me to take on children's ministry to become full-time at the church. And so I did that for about 4 or 5 years. And then we hired a part-time children's ministry director, and I oversaw that position. And in the 18 years I've been here, I've kind of reinvented myself over and over again. I'm currently in like an executive pastor role. So my title's family pastor, but I'm kind of playing more of an executive role.
So when did you do your initial retreat, and how did you find out about Crucible in the first place?
I did my initial retreat in May of 2015. It was in Williams Bay, Wisconsin. I was invited by a man in my church. We were in a men's small group together. He was going to go, and he invited our whole small group. And I thought, no way. I heard a little bit about the weekend. I was like, that weekend sounds crazy. There's no way I'm going to do that. I'm not interested. And he came back from his weekend, had an outstanding experience, highly recommended it. And my thought was, hey, that's great for you, not for me. And we stayed connected. We actually trained together. We used to do marathons and Ironmans. We spent a lot of time together out running, riding our bikes and things like that, training together. And just developed a really, really deep friendship. So 6 years later, I decided to go. So he invited me. It must have been 2009. And 6 years later, I decided, hey, I'm going to go. I surprised him. I actually brought it up and said, hey, that weekend you invited me to, I think I'm going to do that. And then God had worked in my heart in that 6 years to recognize, I think there's something for me here. I think there's something valuable for me to consider.
So what was it that was brewing for you? Because, this is actually a common story that we have of people saying, someone told me about it a while ago and they brought it up a few different times. And, it often takes a while for the person to finally say yes. And usually there's something going on in life that leads them to a place of saying, this isn't going the way that I want it to, and I want to try something different. And so they end up coming and, having a transformational experience. What was happening for you in life at the time that made you finally say yes after 6 years?
Really, I think when the initial invite was offered to me, I felt like things were going fine in my life. I was like, hey, my systems are working. I'm not really having any problems. And they were for the most part. But over that course of that 6 years, I began to see how the strategies I had for life and managing myself and managing the world around me were not getting me the results I wanted. And then we have these kids and we have this family, and I'd hear from my friends and coworkers, man, you're doing great. Life is just seeming to go really well for you. The more like I was the picture of success, the more I felt like a failure. I just had this internal, something is off. I felt like a fraud. And one of those things that I think really was causing that was I was playing nice guy all day at work or out in the world. So something would happen, like a volunteer would tell me last second they couldn't make it and I was depending on them. And I would just with a smile say, hey, no problem. Don't worry about that. But inside, I was like, are you kidding me? This has put me in such a bad situation. I don't have the help I need. And now I don't know what I'm going to do. And so I was struggling with, I'm angry about that situation, but I can't let that out. But then I'd go home and there wasn't that filter. And my wife and kids, they were getting the worst parts of me. And it wasn't an abusive, horrible environment, but I recognized, wait a minute, everybody else in the world's getting the best part of me. When I come home, I'm dumping on my wife and kids because I'm just so dissatisfied. Yeah. And the more that happened, the more I felt like a fraud. So I'd sit in meetings or I'd talk about ministry or I'd be doing my job. And I felt like, man, I am such a fake. And if anybody knew the real me, they would reject me. And so that was like, okay, I've got to do something here because no amount of achieving success is getting me what I want in life. I felt like I was just utterly stuck with no way out. And it wasn't until I went to the retreat that I actually found the truth was in being honest about what was going on. That was the freeing thing, being able to share that. And then it wasn't just be nice at home, because that's what I was trying to do. I needed to learn how to handle those things that were coming up, those moments of disappointment, those moments of anger. I needed to learn how to handle those emotions so that they didn't get stuffed and then spill out somewhere else. But the more I tried to control it, the worse it got.
Absolutely. It's that idea of trying to, hold sand in your hand. And the harder you squeeze, the more it ends up spilling out and you can't stop it. And you're doing your best, but it's happening anyway. So
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I can relate to that. Thanks for sharing. So you told us about what you have going on in life, 4 kids and a full-time pastor. Your life is really full of things. What makes Crucible worth it? You just got certified as a retreat leader with Crucible, and that takes thousands of hours of time invested in attending retreats, staffing retreats, working on your leadership. When you look at the things that you do in your life, they all are really worthy things. So what makes Crucible worth the time, the sacrifice, and the investment to keep leaning into it?
Well, first off, I'm a guy who was going to keep a very full schedule. I like to have a lot going on and I go full out all the time. That's just a personality thing. So I feel like I make space for what I want to make space for. I make space for this because it makes me better in all those other areas. And every time I am on a retreat, every time I'm with a group of men doing soul work or in trainings and things like that, anytime I'm there, I am getting sharpened and becoming a better husband, father. I'm becoming a better pastor. I'm becoming a better friend and brother. Like all of these areas of my life are impacted by the deep work that I'm doing in the Crucible Project. It's getting at the deeper stuff of my life that's driving me. And when I can heal those parts of me, I can bring those beautiful parts of me to those other areas of the world. And so it feels like a worthy investment. It's something that is going to impact in a positive way all those other areas. And so I make the time for it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's talk about that impact. You mentioned that it impacts your parenting and your marriage and your ministry and your friendships. Start with your marriage. What kind of impact does it have there?
So marriage is tough. I know that's not news to anybody, but it is harder than I ever thought it would ever be. And Lisa and I have worked hard to have a healthy marriage. I think when I was young, I thought that meant conflict-free. And what I've learned is that it just means that there's always going to be conflict, but a healthy marriage means you work through that conflict and you actually can come back to restoration and relationship. So Crucible Project has given us tools, language to be able to discuss the problems that are coming up, given us an ability to connect and share from a deeper heart level. So there may be conflict still. We're able to work through that to get to a deeper place of connection, which can be uncomfortable at times. But man, if we're going to have the conflict one way or another, that's going to happen in marriage. I'd rather have the tools to work through it and understand each other more. Make space for each other. Like, okay, I understand that's how you process the world. That's different from me. And it doesn't make it wrong or bad. It's just, it's different. And I have space for that because you're an individual and I'm an individual and we're going to make space for how our lives are going to mesh in that aspect. And so those are some of the things that come to mind.
Well, and you guys got married young, right?
Yeah. 21 and 19.
My husband and I were 22 and 23 when we got married. So, pretty young as well. When you get married young, you have an idea in your head of what marriage is going to be like and an expectation of how your spouse is going to fulfill all of these needs that you have. At least for me, my story is my spouse was going to provide all of the validation that I needed in the world. And what happens when they don't do that? How do I handle that? When I look at other friends who got married young, and the impact of some of the challenges that they faced and not having the tools that Crucible has given us, I see their story going a really different way. And I'm not saying that your marriage is untouchable or mine is untouchable. The reality is it takes work. It takes that intentional work. But having the tools to be able to lean into those hard conversations, you hit the nail on the head. That restoration, conflict is going to happen, but it's how you repair it. That really is where the rubber meets the road in a healthy relationship. That's huge. So thanks for sharing that. That's one of the things that you got for yourself. How about your parenting? We talk in Crucible about a lot of what we do is looking at some of the messages that we took on as kids, whether it's from parents, coaches, teachers. They might have been things that were actually said out loud. They might have been unintentional messages that we just took on because of the circumstance, and looking at how that impacts us even as adults. So how does your work in Crucible and looking at some of those messages that you've carried with you since you were a kid impact your parenting?
Part of the reason it took me so long to decide to go to a weekend was I had this misconception that what was going to happen on the weekend was we're going to blame our parents for all the mistakes and the bad stuff in our lives. And I had good parents. Like, I think they did the best they could. They're not perfect, but I really looked at my parents and said I had a loving home. I had a lot of good parenting. And I don't feel like it was this overly traumatic experience. Now, there were hard things. There was pain from my childhood. But I was like, I'm not interested in going and having this, my parents were bad, and that's why I have all this stuff in my life, or that's why I'm struggling in life. I recognized it was my responsibility. These things were my things to deal with. And I wasn't interested in blaming somebody else for them. What I found was that's not the case at all, that no matter what our situation is, maybe we did have trauma in our past, we are responsible for what we're doing with that now. But ignoring that the pain was there wasn't getting me to where I wanted to be. I needed to recognize there was pain there. As imperfect parents, as all parents are, there was pain in my past, wounds in my past that needed to be dealt with. And that doesn't make my parents responsible. It makes me responsible for taking the choice to deal with it. And that's what the weekend did, was gave me tools to be able to take responsibility for my choices and my life now and decide what I want to do with this.
Yeah. It's not about placing blame, right? It's about acknowledging what was and how it's still having an impact today and figuring out what we want to do about it and make a different choice going forward.
And as a parent, I know there are things that my kids, as they become adults, they're going to say, yeah, Dad, you said this word to me one time, and it really stuck with me, and it really hurt me. Or there's going to be those moments. And as a loving father, I want them to be able to be honest about that and get the healing from that, to heal from those moments, because I've messed up. I've wounded them in some way, right? Mm-hmm. And I want them to be able to find a healing from that rather than try to protect my image or my ego and not share those things. And so I want them to be able to bring that out in the open, to get the healing they need for that, so they can be themselves in this world.
Yeah. My husband and I joke, so many parents start a college fund when they find out they're pregnant with a kid. We need to start a therapy fund. Because no matter how much we love our kid, we're going to screw up. And everybody receives love differently and interprets things in different ways. And ignoring it doesn't change it.
Yeah. My parents, they had a messy divorce that was really painful. And there was a lot of hurt from that in my past. So I went into marriage saying I don't want to make the mistakes they did. I want to model the best parts of what they did. I don't want to make the same mistakes they did. For me, one of those things with my kids was making space for their emotions. I don't feel like that was done for me as a kid. If my emotion was something that was counter to the agenda for the family for the day, there's no time for you to be sad, we got to get out the door, or your anger is bothering me and disrupting me, and go to your room. And I get that as parents, we have to discipline and we have to manage for the best of the whole family unit. But I recognize after my Crucible initial weekend that I didn't do sadness. That just didn't exist in me. I avoided it. In fact, when I felt sad, it was so uncomfortable, I transformed it into anger. There was this horrible story, a news report of a family was on vacation and their toddler, an alligator got him. And I remember my wife in tears as we watched the news and heard the story, and I went to anger immediately, right? I couldn't do the sad part. I just went right to anger. She looked at me and was like, "What? I mean, this is a really sad story. What are you talking about here? Who knows what happened?" And so I didn't do sadness. So making space for my kids to be able to experience their emotions without telling them they were wrong, and being able to just sit with them in that. And be able to talk with them about what they're feeling, blessing my kids, being able to encourage them and say the things I see and the best parts of them, the way that God's wired them and the good things He's put in their hearts to make a difference in this world. So being able to really lift them up and encourage them on who they are, not just the things they do in the world and not just the accomplishments they have. And so it's that connecting on a deeper level with them, but also making space for them to be able to understand their emotions and process them.
Wow. The home I grew up in is similar to yours. The emotion has to fit the agenda of the day. And if it doesn't, it's too much. We don't have time for that. And the gift of giving your kids space to be who God made them to be and bring the emotions that God has given them without feeling like they're being dismissed or written off. What a validation. So I really honor that for you, for your wife, for your kids. Those are the stories that when we talk about what Crucible does for families, that's the ripple effect. This is the generational change that we're talking about. When you take a whole generation of kids and tell them, you're allowed to take up space in this world and we need you and we want you to bring what you have, that's a game changer right there.
Yeah. And it's hard and it's messy, right? Even my son this morning, I was reminding him he needed to get out the door because he was going to be late for school. And he got angry with me. And I told him, listen, I understand you're angry, but it's no right to be disrespectful. You do not have the right to talk to me disrespectfully. And so there's a boundary there. It's not just a free-for-all. We're trying to help them understand how to experience these emotions and manage them appropriately.
I can very easily go to the place of, get over it, let's move on, suck it up, let's go. And it might not be the words I'm saying, but the attitude that I'm bringing and learning how to walk that balance as parents of, we do have a schedule to keep. We do have commitments that we want to honor and uphold. And you can take up space in this world, but also, come on, we got to keep moving forward too. That is a challenge. I feel you there. So that makes sense. What does your work in Crucible do for your role in ministry? And what is different about your work because of Crucible than maybe what it would have been before you were in this work?
I wouldn't have stayed at my church as long as I have without Crucible. I stand for healthy relationships and we're going to work through things. And so I've got a great relationship with my senior pastor. He's actually involved with Crucible as well. And we've worked hard for that. There's been stuff we've had to talk through and work through. And that's throughout my church. I've worked to maintain healthy relationships. And that's involved getting more clear with volunteers about expectations and talking through when expectations are missed, being able to have a gentle, instructive conversation about that rather than a dump of guilt, which is what I would have aired on the side before, is just guilt trip them or stuff it. I was either one of those. And so being able to have good, healthy conversations about missed expectations. The other thing is it changed my teaching ministry. I preach once a month here at my church. This work has helped me to understand people at a deeper level and the motivation that they have. And instead of moving people into a just try harder, commit to being a good Christian and don't do these things and do these things instead. Like, I'm oversimplifying it, but my point is, instead of trying to try harder, it's getting at understanding yourself and really the motivation there so that God's grace can get into the deeper parts of us to heal those things that are actually driving the behavior. Focusing on the behavior isn't really going to get us to solve the problem. And so it's moved my teaching ministry into a deeper level of being able to connect with the heart of the person.
That's incredible. A lot of times it feels like sermons tend to go with here's something that I did awesome, and now let me share it with you so you can learn how to be awesome too. And the more impactful sermons that I hear are where pastors say, here's where I've missed the mark in my life, how God has redeemed that, and I'm sharing it with you so that you can be a part of this as well. And it sounds like this might be a common thread in what you bring too, really getting at the heart and the motivation behind the behavior. It's not what you're doing great or what you suck at. It's what the heart is that you're bringing into it.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Our church, even before Crucible, my senior pastor was doing that kind of thing and he was onto it. I remember an older man in our church saying, I don't remember a pastor ever admitting to making as many mistakes as he does, to being this authentic, this vulnerable on stage. So that was what I learned from. He was my first senior pastor. We're still working together all these years later. And so he modeled that for me well. And so I've seen how I can be able to share some real stuff that's going on in my life and share how I've learned from it and be able to say, hey, this is the real me here. And that makes it relatable. It makes it something that people can recognize as, hey, that could be my story too. Maybe it is my story too. It's not just this polished, everything's good, everything's fine. I've worked through all of that. I think the struggle matters and it's helpful for people to see that.
Yeah. Well, Chris, life is busy, as we've talked about. And as your kids continue to get older, there's only going to be more activities, more sports to run to, and more things to do. What's next for you? You keep coming back. You keep investing more and more and more. And you've shared with us a bit of why it's important to you and why it's worth it. What are your hopes as you continue down the line with Crucible and keep doing retreats?
I just know that every time I'm in Crucible space, it sharpens me and makes me better. And I don't really have like an end goal. I just want to keep doing this work that I love and I'm passionate about, and it's changing me and making me a better man. And I think the work continues. It always will continue. And so my plan is just to keep being involved, keep growing as a leader, keep getting sharpened. And I feel like this is the avenue for me to do that.
You know, the day that you say that you're done working and growing is the day that you're in a coffin. So I love what what your goal is with this. This side of heaven, there is no, I've reached perfection and I don't have anything in my soul to work on.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's still more work to do.
So in light of that, every church has a mission statement of why they exist. And Crucible has a mission statement. We talk about igniting Christ-like change. And so through Crucible and the work that you've done, it's my understanding that you've developed a mission statement for yourself as well. Is that accurate?
That is, yeah.
So what is your mission? Can you share that with us?
So I build transformational community by connecting people to God, self, and others. So I can unpack that a little bit. The transformational community, all about getting to the heart of the person and healing those deep wounded parts, not sticking to the behavior level like I talked about a little earlier, but getting into the deeper parts and helping facilitate true transformation. God, self, and others. Like, I think there's just so much of an opportunity for disconnect in each of those areas. If we are disconnected from ourselves, we'll feel out of place in the world. If we're disconnected from others, we'll feel out of place. If we're disconnected from God, we're going to be out of place. And so being able to integrate those, be able to find healing and connection in those areas, that's what I've found to be true for my life. And that's what I want to help others find as well.
Yeah. Can you unpack for us the order that you put that in? So God first, right? And that, that's scriptural. We get that. But self as second and then others. Tell us about that.
I think, starts with God and understanding ourselves through his eyes. And I think that's the best, truest picture of ourselves. But then moving to self next, because I think in order to be able to connect with others on a healthy level, we have to understand and be in integrity with ourselves. And so there's a loving and accepting of ourselves that needs to happen. There's an embracing of our identity that needs to happen, and a sharpening and growth that happens. That's the work first, is myself. And then I'm able to bring that to others, whether it's in a way of connecting with others for a relationship or it's a way of serving others, that it comes from first having a healthy understanding of who we are in God, who we are as ourselves, and then we can bring that to the world around us.
Oh man, you hit a bullseye there, because I can tell you I've spent a lot of time going God then others, or maybe even others then God then self. And the burnout and relationship breakdown that I see happen, and the sideways ways that I seek out validation from other people or encouragement, or like just a sense of, am I okay? I need somebody else to tell me that I'm okay, because I don't believe it for myself. Someone else has to tell me what my finish line is. That is where I've seen some of the biggest devastation in my own life when it comes to relationships. So your mission is so worthy in bringing that to the world, to the church that you're pastoring, to your wife, to your kids, and to the Crucible community. It is a gift.
Thanks so much for having me on. It's been a joy to be a part of this. The podcast is, I think, such a great gift to our community. So thanks for what you're doing.
Yeah. Thanks, Chris.
For more information about our weekends, please go to thecrucibleproject.org. Or if you're ready to get started on your transformational journey right now, you can connect with one of our Crucible certified coaches for a free 30-minute session at thecrucibleproject.org/coaching. That's thecrucibleproject.org/coaching. If you like what you heard, connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Rate and review wherever you are listening, and don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform. Thank you for listening.